My name is Harper, am 32 years old, and the phone call I received on Tuesday morning made my hands shake so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. My father's voice cut through the line like a blade. No greeting, no warmth, just a cold demand that made 3 years of silence shatter in an instant. He called me a family disgrace and told me I was paying for Thanksgiving dinner for 17 people, or it'd prove once and for all that I was exactly the selfish monster they'd always said I was. I hadn't even been properly invited to this dinner. Hadn't spoken to him since the night he threw me out of his house for asking for my money back. But as I sat there listening to him list everything I owed the family, staring at my bank account on my laptop screen, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to run this time. I agreed to come, but not for the reasons he thought. I had 72 hours to prepare, and by the time Thursday rolled around, they'd wish they'd never made that call. Before I dive into what happened next, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments, because this story is about family drama that happens everywhere, and I'd love to see how far this reaches. If you've ever been the scapegoat in your family or felt like nothing you did was ever good enough, hit that like button right now because you're going to relate to every single word of what I'm about to share. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the revenge I got was sweet, it was justified, and it's going to make you rethink every toxic family obligation you've ever felt pressured into. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail of how this Thanksgiving dinner exploded in the most spectacular way possible. Growing up in Connecticut, I always knew I was different from my family. But I didn't understand why that made me the enemy until I was much older. My father Warren was a construction company owner who believed hard work was the only virtue that mattered, except when it came to his golden child, my younger brother Brock. Warren worshipped Brock from the moment he was born, and my mother Diane went along with whatever Warren said because keeping the peace was more important to her than protecting me from the blatant favoritism that poisoned our household. I worked 2 jobs all through college to pay my own tuition while Brock got a brand new truck for his 16th birthday, a fully paid ride to State University, and an apartment deposit when he graduated that I know cost my parents at least $8,000. Every achievement I earned was met with a shrug and a comment about not getting too big for my britches, while Brock could do no wrong even when he dropped out of his 3rd job in 2 years because the manager didn't appreciate his innovative ideas. The breaking point came 3 years ago when I had just been promoted to marketing director at a mid-sized firm in Boston, and I'd managed to save $45,000 through careful budgeting and sacrifice. Warren called me on a Wednesday evening, his voice unusually humble, and told me his construction company was failing because a major client had declared bankruptcy and left him holding unpaid invoices worth over $100,000. He needed $40,000 to make payroll and keep the business afloat. And he promised he'd pay me back in 6 months with 10% interest because family takes care of family and he'd always taken care of me. I felt sick to my stomach because I knew that money represented my security, my future, possibly a down payment on a house, but the guilt was overwhelming because he was my father, and what kind of daughter lets her father's business collapse when she has the means to help? I transferred the money the next day, got a text from Warren that said, "Thanks kiddo, I won't forget this," and waited for the promised repayment that never came. 8 months later, I sent Warren a polite email asking about the repayment timeline because I was ready to start looking at condos and needed to know when I could count on having that money back in my account. He didn't respond to the email, so I called and got Diane, who said Warren was busy and she'd have him call me back, which he never did. 2 weeks of ignored messages later, I drove to Connecticut on a Saturday and showed up at the house during a family dinner where Brock, his wife Cassidy, and my paternal grandmother Dorothy were all gathered around the table eating pot roast like everything was fine. I asked Warren in front of everyone when I could expect my $40,000 back, and the explosion that followed changed my life forever. Warren's face turned crimson and he slammed his hand on the table so hard the dishes rattled, and he told me I was the most selfish, ungrateful person he'd ever had the misfortune of raising. He said that money wasn't a loan, it was repayment for 18 years of him feeding me, clothing me, and putting a roof over my head, and if I was so obsessed with money that I'd humiliate him in front of his family, then I was no daughter of his. Brock jumped in immediately to agree that I was being greedy and showing off my success, making everyone uncomfortable by demanding money back like some kind of loan shark. Diane sat there silently, with tears running down her face, but said absolutely nothing in my defense, and when I looked at Dorothy for support, she just looked down at her plate and shook her head. I left that house and never went back, blocking most of their numbers and spending the next 3 Thanksgivings alone in my Boston apartment eating Chinese takeout and trying to convince myself I'd made the right choice. The extended family took Warren's side without ever asking for my version of events, and I lost aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd known me my whole life, because Warren's narrative was that I'd abandoned the family over money when times got tough. I rebuilt my life slowly, creating a chosen family from friends and coworkers who showed me what real support looked like, and I genuinely thought I'd never hear from Warren or Brock again. Then, Tuesday morning, my phone rang from an unknown number, and apparently 3 years wasn't long enough for them to forget I existed, especially when they needed something. The call came at 6:47 in the morning, which should have been my first warning that nothing good was about to happen. I'd been up for 20 minutes, still in my pajamas with my hair in a messy bun, scrolling through work emails with my first cup of coffee, when my phone lit up with a Massachusetts number I didn't recognize. Something made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail, and Warren's voice came through the speaker with zero preamble, just a flat statement that made my stomach drop. "You're paying for Thanksgiving dinner," he said, like he was informing me of a fact rather than making a request, and when I asked what he was talking about, he sighed like I was being deliberately dense. "We're having 17 people for Thanksgiving, and you're covering the cost because you owe this family everything, and it's time you stepped up and proved you're not the selfish disgrace everyone thinks you are." I sat there in stunned silence while Warren explained that Head invited himself, Diane, Brock, Cassidy, their 3 kids, his 2 siblings and their families, and Dorothy, to a Thanksgiving feast that Head already arranged with a local catering company. He texted me an itemized list while we were still on the phone, and I watched the numbers populate on my screen with growing disbelief because the total came to between $850 and $1,000 depending on final headcount and whether I wanted to include a decent tip for the frust delivery driver. Warren told me the caterer needed payment by Wednesday evening, and I should call them directly to put my credit card on file, and when I asked why on earth I would pay for a dinner I hadn't even been invited to properly, he launched into the guilt trip I should have seen coming. He brought up the $40,000 immediately, but with a twisted logic that made my head spin, saying that money was never a loan in the first place because parents don't owe their children repayment for basic child-rearing expenses. According to Warren's math, 18 years of feeding me, buying me clothes, and providing shelter added up to way more than $40,000. So really, I still owed them, and paying for one Thanksgiving dinner was the least I could do. The manipulation got worse from there because Warren knows exactly which buttons to push after 32 years of practice. He told me Dorothy was 86 years old and this might be her last Thanksgiving, and did I really want to be the granddaughter who was too cheap to give her elderly grandmother one nice holiday meal, surrounded by family? He said everyone in the family knew I'd abandoned them over money, and this was my chance to prove I wasn't the person they all thought I was, and if I refused to do this one simple thing, then I'd be confirming every negative thing they'd ever said about me behind my back. He played the victim beautifully, talking about all the sacrifices he and Diane made for me growing up, how they went without things so I could have opportunities, how ungrateful kids these days don't understand what their parents gave up for them. I felt the old familiar shame creeping up my spine, even though my rational brain was screaming that this was emotional blackmail and I should hang up immediately, but there was still a part of me that wanted to prove I wasn't the villain in their story. Then Warren casually dropped the real agenda about 15 minutes into the call, mentioning almost as an afterthought that Brock had recently lost his job and was going through a tough time financially. Warren said nothing directly about wanting money for Brock, but the implication hung in the air like smoke, and I realized with crystal clarity that the Thanksgiving dinner was just the opening move in a longer game. They wanted to get me to the house, soften me up with family togetherness and guilt, then hit me up for a loan to Brock that would probably be in the $10,000 to $20,000 range based on Warren's previous asks. The dinner wasn't about reconciliation or giving Dorothy a nice holiday, it was about manipulation and control and proving they could still make me dance to their tune after 3 years of silence. I should have told Warren exactly where he could shove his Thanksgiving dinner and his itemized catering bill, but instead I heard myself saying I'd be there on Thursday at noon, and I'd take care of the payment. Warren sounded surprised but recovered quickly, telling me not to be late and to dress nicely because we'd have guests, which was a weird thing to say about a family dinner, but I was too rattled to process it properly in the moment. After I hung up, I sat on my couch for 20 minutes, just staring at the wall, trying to figure out what I'd just agreed to and why I hadn't immediately said no. The truth was complicated because part of me genuinely missed my family despite everything they'd done, and another part of me wanted the chance to prove I wasn't the person Warren had painted me as to all our relatives. But there was a third part, smaller and quieter, that was absolutely furious at the audacity of this man calling me after 3 years of silence to demand I fund his holiday dinner, and that part of me started thinking about revenge instead of reconciliation. I had 72 hours before Thursday, and if Warren thought he was going to humiliate me one more time and walk away unscathed, he had severely underestimated how much I'd changed in 3 years of being free from his manipulation. The first person I called was Sloan, my best friend since college and a family law attorney who'd listened to me cry over wine more times than I could count in the past 3 years. Sloan picked up on the second ring and immediately knew something was wrong because I never call her before 9 in the morning unless it's an emergency. And when I told her about Warren's phone call, she let out a string of curse words that would have made a sailor blush. We met for coffee at 10 that morning at our usual spot in downtown Boston, and I laid out everything Warren had said while Sloan took notes on her legal pad with the intensity she usually reserved for hostile witnesses. When I finished talking, Sloan looked up at me with fire in her eyes and told me the $40,000 was legally a loan regardless of what Warren claimed, and I had the text messages and bank transfer records to prove there were agreed-upon terms for repayment. She offered to draft a formal demand letter that would scare Warren into either paying up or facing a lawsuit, but I surprised both of us by saying I had a different idea. I told Sloan I didn't want to pursue the money through legal channels because even if I won, I'd never actually see the $40,000, and what I really wanted was something more valuable than money. I wanted the truth exposed. I wanted my extended family to know what really happened 3 years ago, and I wanted Warren to face consequences for manipulating everyone's perception of me while hiding his own financial mismanagement. Sloan leaned back in her chair and smiled the way she does when she's about to suggest something brilliant and slightly unethical, and she asked me if I was willing to document everything that happened at Thanksgiving dinner. I said yes immediately, and Sloan started sketching out a plan that involved me wearing a wire and having backup waiting outside in case things got dangerous, because Shed met Warren twice and knew he had a temper that could turn violent when cornered. The second ally came to me unexpectedly that same afternoon when I got a direct message on social media from Warren's younger sister Francine, who I hadn't spoken to since the dinner blow-up 3 years ago. Francine's message was cautious and apologetic, saying Shed heard through the family grapevine that Warren had contacted me about Thanksgiving and she needed to tell me some things I deserved to know. We met at a park halfway between Boston and her town in Rhode Island, sitting on a bench by a duck pond while Francine unloaded secrets that made my blood boil with every word. She told me Warren had borrowed money from 4 different relatives over the past 5 years and hadn't paid back a single person, always with the same story about temporary cash flow problems and promises of repayment with interest that never materialized. Brock had been financially supported by Warren and Diane his entire adult life to the tune of over $50,000 in the past 3 years alone, money that came from these loans Warren took from family members who trusted him. Francine revealed that Dorothy had actually sided with me privately after the dinner confrontation 3 years ago, telling Francine that Warren had no right to treat a loan like a gift and it'd been right to ask for my money back. But Warren pressured Dorothy to publicly shun me by threatening to cut her off from seeing Brock's kids, and Dorothy at her age felt she couldn't risk losing access to her great-grandchildren over a financial dispute. Francine felt guilty for not speaking up at the time, guilty for letting Warren control the family narrative, guilty for watching me get exiled while knowing the truth about Warren's pattern of financial manipulation. She wanted to help expose what Warren had done, but she was terrified of the family backlash and what it might mean for her relationship with her elderly mother, so I promised her I'd keep her involvement quiet while still using the information she'd given me. The third member of my revenge team came together when I called my college roommate, Kimberly, who'd gone on to become a documentary filmmaker specializing in family dynamics and social justice issues. I explained the situation and told Kimberly I wanted the Thanksgiving confrontation documented on video and audio, not for public release, but as evidence and protection in case Warren tried to twist the narrative afterward. Kimberly got excited immediately because she'd been wanting to do a project on financial abuse within families, and this was exactly the kind of real-world example that showed how manipulation worked. She suggested a hidden camera setup with me wearing a wire and her waiting outside in a car with recording equipment, and we agreed that if things got physically dangerous, she'd call the police immediately rather than trying to intervene herself. For the first time since Warren's phone call, I felt like I had some control over the situation instead of just being a victim of his manipulation, and I told Kimberly that after 3 years of Warren controlling the narrative about who I was and what Edie done, it was time for the truth to come out. Wednesday afternoon, I called the catering company to confirm the Thanksgiving order and get details about payment, figuring I should at least know what I was supposedly paying for before I showed up on Thursday. The man who answered introduced himself as Maurice and sounded confused when I said I was calling about the 17-person Thanksgiving dinner order for Warren because according to his records that order had been canceled the previous day. My stomach dropped and I asked Maurice to repeat what Head just said, and he explained patiently that Warren had called Tuesday afternoon, several hours after my phone call with him, and canceled the large order that had been placed the week before. I felt sick because I immediately understood what was happening, but I asked Maurice to tell me everything about the current order just to confirm my suspicions. Maurice pulled up Warren's account and told me there was indeed a Thanksgiving order scheduled for Thursday delivery, but it was for 6 people instead of 17, and the menu was completely different from what a family gathering would look like. Warren had ordered dry-aged ribeye steaks, lobster tails, truffle mashed potatoes, grilled asparagus with hollandaise, and an expensive bottle of wine, with the total cost coming to $680, including tip and delivery fee. This wasn't a family dinner menu, this was an attempt to impress someone, and the 6-person head count meant Warren, Diane, Brock, Cassidy, and 2 other people I didn't know about. Maurice mentioned that Warren had seemed nervous when placing the order and kept emphasizing that everything needed to be perfect for an important business dinner, which confirmed my growing suspicion that Thursday wasn't about family reconciliation at all. I thanked Maurice and hung up, then immediately started making phone calls to figure out what Warren's actual plan was. My first call was to Dorothy, breaking 3 years of silence with a shaky voice that asked if she was coming to Thanksgiving dinner at Warren's house. Dorothy sounded shocked to hear from me, and even more shocked by the question, because according to her she wasn't invited to Warren's house for Thanksgiving and had been told it was going to be a small gathering this year. Warren had told Dorothy he and Diane were just having Brock's family over for a quiet meal, and Dorothy had made plans to have Thanksgiving with Francine's family instead, which meant Warren had lied to me about Dorothy's attendance, and probably about most of the other guests too. Dorothy asked me what was going on, and I gave her a quick summary of Warren's phone call demanding I pay for 17 people, and she made a disgusted sound that told me she knew exactly what her son was doing. I pressed Dorothy for any information about why Warren would be having a business dinner on Thanksgiving, and she hesitated before telling me she'd overheard Brock talking to Cassidy about meeting with potential investors for some new business venture. That piece of information clicked everything into place, and I realized Warren's entire scheme was even more elaborate than I'd initially thought. Head invited me to Thanksgiving under false pretenses about a family gathering, demanded I pay for a 17-person dinner that didn't exist, planned to pocket the difference between what I paid and what the actual meal cost, and intended to use the occasion to pressure me into investing in whatever half-baked business idea Brock had come up with this time. The audacity was almost impressive if it wasn't so infuriating. My last call of the afternoon was to Cassidy, who I'd actually been friendly with before the family explosion 3 years ago. Cassidy answered cautiously when she saw my number, and I could hear kids yelling in the background as I asked her point blank what was happening on Thursday. There was a long silence before Cassidy said she couldn't talk long but she needed to warn me, and what she told me made everything crystallize. Brock was meeting with 2 potential investors on Thanksgiving Day, trying to get $50,000 in startup capital for an app he wanted to develop that would connect contractors with suppliers. The investors were friends of Warren's from his construction days, and the whole dinner was designed to make Brock look successful and stable by having his sister there as proof that his family had money and connections. Cassidy told me in a whisper that I shouldn't give Brock a single dollar because they'd never pay it back, and she was tired of watching my family get bled dry by Warren and Brock's constant financial emergencies. She said she felt guilty about what happened 3 years ago and guilty about what Warren was planning now, but she couldn't speak up publicly because Brock would make her life hell if she contradicted him in front of his investors. After I hung up with Cassidy, I sat in my apartment with all the pieces of the puzzle finally arranged in a clear picture. Warren had created an elaborate scam where he'd manipulate me into paying for a dinner that didn't exist, then use the fake family gathering as a backdrop to pressure me into investing in Brock's business, while making it look like I was naturally generous and supportive. If I showed up and wrote a check for the fake catering bill without questioning it, Warren would pocket $300 or more, and I'd look like such a good family member that saying no to Brock's investment pitch would be nearly impossible. The whole thing was designed to trap me into funding Brock's latest scheme, while simultaneously making me look bad if I refused, because I'd already agreed to help the family by paying for dinner. I had the truth now. I had allies in place, and I had less than 24 hours to decide whether I was going to walk away from this mess, or show up on Thursday and burn Warren's entire scheme to the ground in front of his investors. The smart thing would have been to send a text saying I wasn't coming and block everyone's numbers again, but I kept thinking about 3 years of being called selfish and ungrateful by people who never heard my side of the story. I thought about Francine's revelation that Warren had borrowed from multiple family members and never paid them back while painting me as the greedy villain. I thought about Dorothy being manipulated into shunning me because Warren threatened access to her great-grandchildren. The smart thing would have been to walk away, but I've never claimed to be smart when it comes to my family, so I texted Kimberly and told her the plan was on for Thursday morning. Thursday morning, I woke up at 7 with my heart pounding and my hands shaking, the kind of nervous energy that comes from knowing you're about to do something that can't be undone. I took a long shower and tried to calm my breathing while running through everything I'd learned over the past 2 days, reminding myself that I had evidence, I had witnesses, and I had every right to defend myself against Warren's manipulation. Getting dressed was a strategic decision because I needed to look put together enough that the investors would take me seriously, but not so polished that Warren could accuse me of showing off my success, so I settled on dark jeans and a nice blazer that split the difference. Kimberly arrived at my apartment at 10 in the morning with a duffel bag full of equipment, and we spent an hour setting up the hidden camera in my purse and threading the audio wire under my blazer where it wouldn't be visible. The wire felt strange against my skin, a constant reminder that everything I said and heard would be recorded and potentially used as evidence later. Kimberly tested the equipment 3 times to make sure the audio quality was clear and the camera angle would capture faces and reactions, then gave me a pep talk about staying calm and not letting Warren see that I knew about his scheme. Sloan texted me right before I left, a simple message that said, "You've got this, and remember, documentation is power," and I felt a surge of gratitude for the people who'd shown up to support me when my biological family had abandoned me over money. The drive from Boston to Warren's house in Connecticut took exactly 92 minutes, and I spent every one of them practicing what I'd say and how I'd react when the lies started flying. Warren's house looked exactly the same as it had 3 years ago, a modest colonial in a neighborhood that had seen better days, with paint peeling on the shutters and grass that needed mowing even in late November. I parked on the street and sat in my car for a full 5 minutes, watching Kimberly pull up 2 houses down and settle in with her recording equipment, and then I took a deep breath and walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. Warren answered on the second knock, and the fake smile he plastered on his face didn't come anywhere near his eyes as he looked me up and down like he was appraising livestock. "You're late," he said. Even though I'd arrived at exactly noon like Head demanded, and he stepped aside to let me in without any other greeting or acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken in 3 years. The living room hit me with a wave of nostalgia and nausea because everything was the same worn couch, the same family photos on the wall that probably still included me in some of them, the same smell of Diane's lavender air freshener that used to mean home and now just meant anxiety. Diane was in the kitchen and I could hear pots clanging, but she didn't come out to say hello, and I wondered if she was ashamed or just following Warren's lead in treating my presence like it was mandatory rather than welcome. Brock was sprawled on the couch looking at his phone, and when he glanced up at me there was something smug in his expression that made my jaw clench. He was wearing an expensive watch I knew he couldn't afford, probably bought with money from Warren's loans that he'd never pay back, and he nodded at me like we were acquaintances instead of siblings. Who'd grown up, sharing a bathroom and fighting over the TV remote. Cassidy was nowhere to be seen, which surprised me until I remembered Shed warned me on the phone and probably couldn't face me after revealing Warren's plan. The two men sitting in the living room were obviously the investors, both in their 50s wearing business casual attire that looked uncomfortable in the relaxed setting of someone's home on a holiday. Warren introduced them as Preston and Garrett, old business associates who were interested in Brock's innovative new venture. And the way he said it made my skin crawl, because I could hear the sales pitch already forming. Preston stood to shake my hand and seemed genuinely friendly, asking about my drive and whether I wanted something to drink, while Garrett stayed seated and assessed me with the cold calculation of someone who's used to evaluating risk versus reward in business deals. Warren suddenly switched on the charm like someone had flipped a circuit breaker, his voice going warm and proud as he told Preston and Garrett all about his successful daughter, the marketing director who worked for a great firm in Boston. The whiplash of going from being called a disgrace on Tuesday to being bragged about on Thursday would have been funny if it wasn't so transparent, and I watched Preston and Garrett exchange a quick glance that told me they weren't complete idiots and had noticed the awkward family dynamics. Brock launched into his pitch without any preamble, talking about his revolutionary app idea that would connect contractors with suppliers through some kind of innovative algorithm, and within 30 seconds I knew the whole concept was half-baked because apps that did exactly this already existed, and Brock clearly hadn't done any market research. I asked polite questions and let Brock stumble through his presentation, watching his confidence falter every time I brought up basic business concepts like target demographics or competitive analysis that he obviously hadn't considered. Preston and Garrett's expressions got more skeptical with every answer Brock gave, and I could see Warren sweating as he realized his son's big pitch was falling apart before they even got to the part where they asked me for money. The whole scene was almost sad in how pathetic it was, watching two grown men try to scam investors with an idea they'd barely thought through, using a family dinner as a prop to make themselves look stable and successful. I let it play out for 20 minutes before Warren decided to move to phase 2 of his plan, and that's when everything started to go sideways in exactly the way I'd been waiting for. Warren cleared his throat with the theatrical timing of someone who's rehearsed this moment, and he announced to the room that I was generously covering the cost of today's Thanksgiving dinner because family takes care of family, right, Harper? He looked at me with an expression that dared me to contradict him in front of his investors, and I could see Brock sitting up straighter on the couch because he knew this was the moment that would make him look good by association. Warren told Preston and Garrett that I understood the importance of family values and supporting each other through thick and thin, and he asked me in front of everyone to write a check for $1,200 to cover the catering bill plus reimbursement for Diane's decoration and preparation expenses. The number was even higher than the fake 17-person dinner would have cost, and I realized Warren was just making up numbers now, seeing how far he could push before I pushed back. I asked in the sweetest voice I could manage whether that was for the dinner for 17 people Warren had told me about on Tuesday, and I watched his face tighten almost imperceptibly before he recovered and said, "Yes, everyone's just running late because of holiday traffic." Brock jumped in without missing a beat to tell me not to be difficult and just write the check, using the same dismissive tone he'd always used when we were kids, and he wanted me to go away. Diane was still in the kitchen, but I could see her through the doorway, and Shed stopped washing dishes to stand completely still with her back to us, and I wondered if she knew what was about to happen. Cassidy came down the stairs at that moment and took one look at the scene, then turned around and went right back up, and I didn't blame her for not wanting to witness what came next. Preston and Garrett looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, like they were trying to figure out how to politely extract themselves from what was clearly becoming a family confrontation rather than a business dinner. I pulled out my phone with deliberate slowness and said, "I'd love to write a check, but first I wanted to see the catering invoice for 17 people, just to make sure everything was in order." Warren's face flushed red and he sputtered that I didn't trust my own father, that this was insulting and inappropriate, and Brock stood up from the couch like he thought physical intimidation might work where words had failed. I stayed calm and said that was fine. I understood if the invoice was in Warren's email and his phone was charging, because I'd taken the liberty of calling Maurice the caterer yesterday afternoon to confirm the order details. The room went absolutely silent except for the sound of Diane dropping a dish in the kitchen sink, and I watched Warren's expressions cycle through confusion, anger, and panic in the space of about 3 seconds. I told everyone in a clear voice that the 17-person order had been canceled on Tuesday afternoon, and the only order scheduled for delivery today was for 6 people at a cost of $680, including tip. I asked Warren where the other 11 people were, why Grandmother Dorothy wasn't invited when Head specifically told me she'd be here, and what exactly he planned to do with the extra $500 I would have given him if I'd written that check without asking questions. Brock exploded off the couch yelling that I was insane for calling the caterer, that I was paranoid and crazy and always looking for reasons to make the family look bad, while Warren tried to talk over him with weak explanations about changed plans and miscommunication that didn't make any sense. Preston and Garrett stood up simultaneously, and I could see them calculating the fastest route to the door, because nobody wants to be trapped in someone else's family meltdown when you're there for a business meeting. Warren blocked their path to the door with his body and tried desperately to salvage the situation, telling them that this was just a misunderstanding, that Harper had always been dramatic and difficult, that we could sort this out after dinner. Preston looked at Warren with something between pity and disgust and said they should go. They had other plans anyway, and Garrett was already pulling his car keys from his pocket. I wasn't done though, not even close, because 3 years of being called selfish and ungrateful was about to get answered in full. I told Preston and Garrett before they could leave that 3 years ago my father borrowed $40,000 from me with a promise to repay it in 6 months, and he never paid back a single dollar, and when I asked about it he threw me out of the family and turned everyone against me. Warren shouted that I was a liar, that I'd always been a liar, that everything coming out of my mouth was fiction designed to make him look bad, but his voice had the desperate edge of someone who knows they're losing control of the narrative. Brock told me to shut up, actually screamed it across the room, and said I was ruining everything like I always did, that I couldn't stand to see him succeed, so I had to sabotage his investor meeting with my vindictive lies. I asked Brock how much money Warren and Diane had given him in the past 3 years, and he froze like I'd slapped him, and that's when Cassidy's voice came from the stairway saying $47,000. Everyone turned to look at her, standing there in sweatpants and an old t-shirt with her arms crossed, and she repeated it louder for the people in the back. $47,000 in 3 years to cover Brock's car payments, rent, credit card debt, and his failed dropshipping business that lost money for 8 months before he gave up. Brock turned on his wife with a fury I'd never seen before and told her to shut her mouth, but Cassidy had clearly reached her limit because she just kept talking. I pulled a folder from my purse while Cassidy was talking. The folder I'd prepared with Sloane's help that contained copies of everything Warren wanted to pretend didn't exist. Bank transfer records showing $40,000 moving from my account to Warren's on a specific date 3 years ago, text messages where Warren promised repayment in 6 months with 10% interest, an email chain where we discussed the loan terms, and I asked when the construction company's cash flow would improve enough for him to pay me back. I held up the documents for Preston and Garrett to see, not because I cared what they thought, but because I wanted Warren to know I had proof of everything Head tried to erase from the family history. I told the investors that this was the businessman they were considering partnering with, someone who borrowed money from his own daughter and never paid it back, then turned the entire family against her when she had the audacity to ask about repayment. Warren lunged for the folder, and I stepped back smoothly, holding it out of his reach, and I told him these were copies, and my lawyer had the originals, along with a demand letter that was ready to be filed if he ever tried to contact me again with his manipulative schemes. Brock started toward me with his fists clenched, and I pulled out my phone, holding it up so he could see Kimberly's number on the screen ready to dial, and I told him if he touched me I'd have the police here in under 3 minutes. The visible wire under my blazer must have registered at that moment because Warren's eyes went wide and he realized everything happening in his living room was being recorded, and the color drained from his face as the implications hit him. Cassidy was still talking, telling Preston and Garrett that Warren had borrowed money from at least 4 other family members that she knew about, never paying any of them back while using the funds to support Brock's endless series of failed business ventures and poor financial decisions. I asked Brock directly how much of that $47,000 Head paid back to our parents, and he told me to go to hell, which was answer enough for everyone in the room. Cassidy said the actual number was 0, Not $1 had been repaid, and Warren had funded Brock's lifestyle by taking loans from relatives and telling everyone that I was the problem, that I was successful and selfish and had abandoned my struggling family in their time of need. The lies had been so thorough that aunts and uncles who'd known me since birth had completely cut me off based on Warren's version of events where I was the villain and he was the victim of an ungrateful daughter. Preston looked at me with something like sympathy and said he was sorry I'd dealt with this, that I deserved better, and then he and Garrett walked out the door without looking back at Warren or Brock. The doorbell rang the moment they left, and Warren just stood there frozen while I went to answer it because I knew exactly who it was. Maurice stood on the porch with bags of food, the expensive business dinner that was supposed to impress investors who were already driving away, and he asked cheerfully if Warren was ready for the delivery. Warren tried one more time to make me the villain, demanding in front of Maurice that I pay for the dinner since Eid agreed to cover the cost, but I told Maurice and everyone else in the house that I wasn't paying for anything. I explained to Maurice that I'd been scammed with lies about a 17-person family dinner, and the 6-person order he was delivering was actually a business dinner I'd never agreed to fund, and Warren could pay his own bill for his own food. Warren's face turned a shade of purple I'd only seen once before, the night he threw me out 3 years ago, and I recognized that specific color as the one that meant his rage was about to overflow into violence. He started listing everything he'd done for me as a child, feeding me and clothing me and putting a roof over my head like these weren't the baseline legal requirements of being a parent. I stayed calm and told him that was called being a parent, that was his legal obligation, and he didn't get to bill me for basic child rearing 18 years after the fact. He got in my face close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath, and he said he should have left me at the hospital when I was born, and Diane gasped from the kitchen doorway, but still said nothing in my defense. Brock told me I'd always thought I was better than them, and I corrected him by saying I just wanted to be treated like family instead of like an ATM with a guilt complex. Warren grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, telling me I'd write that check or else, and my phone started buzzing in my pocket because Kimberly had heard everything through the wire and was calling the police like we'd planned. I told Warren to let go of me or I'd press charges, and I held up my phone so he could see Kimberly's name on the screen and understand that someone outside the house knew exactly what was happening. The recording device under my blazer felt like armor in that moment. Proof that I wasn't crazy or dramatic or making things up. Proof that would exist even if Warren convinced everyone I was lying. He let go of my arm, but the red marks from his fingers were already visible, and I knew those would show up clearly on Kimberly's video footage along with everything else. Diane's voice cut through the chaos with a volume I'd never heard from her in 32 years, just one word shouted so loud it seemed to vibrate the windows. "Enough!" she screamed, and everyone turned to look at my mother. Hode spent 3 years saying nothing while Warren destroyed my relationship with the family. She was shaking, her face blotchy from crying, and she told Warren to let me go immediately, and when he tried to tell her to stay out of it, she said no with a firmness that shocked all of us. Diane walked into the living room and stood between me and Warren, and she told me in front of everyone that my father had stolen from me, she'd watched it happen, and she'd said nothing because she was a coward who valued peace over protecting her own daughter. Diane apologized to me with tears streaming down her face, saying I hadn't deserved any of what happened, and then she turned to Warren and said the words I never thought I'd hear from my passive, conflict-avoiding mother. "I want a divorce," she said, and the room went so quiet I could hear Maurice still standing on the porch, shifting the bags of food awkwardly. Brock started to say something and Diane cut him off, telling him she was 61 years old and she was tired of lying, tired of enabling Warren's financial manipulation, tired of watching him destroy relationships while she stayed silent. She told me she didn't expect forgiveness, but I deserved to know that none of this was my fault, that Warren had borrowed and stolen from people for years while making me the scapegoat for his own failures. A knock on the door interrupted Diane's confession, and I opened it to find 2 police officers standing there looking professionally concerned. Kimberly had called them when she heard Warren grab me, and they asked if everyone in the house was safe and whether anyone needed medical attention. I showed them my arm where Warren's fingerprints were already turning into bruises, and one officer asked if I wanted to press charges for assault. I looked at Warren, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd destroyed his family through greed and pride, and the desperate need to never admit he was wrong about anything. Part of me wanted to press charges, wanted him to face legal consequences for everything he'd done, but the larger part of me just wanted to be done with him forever. I told the officer I just wanted to leave, and I didn't want my father contacting me again, and the officer told Warren directly that he was not to reach out to me unless I initiated contact, and if he violated that instruction, they'd be back with charges for harassment in addition to assault. Warren had deflated completely, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands, while Brock stood against the wall looking furious but impotent now that his investor meeting had imploded and his wife had exposed his financial dependence. Cassidy came down the stairs with her purse and told Brock she was staying with her sister for a while, and when he tried to argue, she just walked past him and out the door without another word. Maurice cleared his throat and asked if anyone was going to pay for the food, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of standing in this destroyed living room with police present while the caterer worried about his bill. Warren pulled out his wallet with shaking hands and gave Maurice his credit card, and the caterer processed the payment on his phone and left the bags of expensive food on the dining room table where they'd probably sit uneaten because nobody in this house had any appetite left. I started walking toward the door, and Cassidy stopped me on the porch, pulling me into a hug that I hadn't expected and didn't know I needed. She whispered that she was sorry for all of it, for staying quiet 3 years ago, for not warning me sooner about Warren's plan, for being part of a family that had treated me like I was disposable. I hugged her back and told her speaking up today took courage, and I meant it, because I knew how hard it was to go against family even when family was wrong. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I sat in my apartment with Sloane and Kimberly, watching the footage from that day and still feeling surreal that it had all actually happened. Kimberly had backed up the recording in 3 different places and given me copies on 2 USB drives, evidence that would exist forever of Warren's manipulation and lies and violence. Sloane had drafted a cease and desist letter to Warren that was formally delivered by a process server, and Id made the decision not to pursue the $40,000 through legal channels because I knew I'd never see that money, and I was okay with letting it go. The money had been my tuition for learning exactly who Warren was and what he was capable of, and that was an expensive lesson but one I apparently needed to learn. Dorothy called me 3 days after Thanksgiving, crying and apologizing for not defending me 3 years ago, and we talked for 2 hours about everything that had happened. She told me Shed spoken to Warren's 2 siblings, and they'd confirmed that he owed money to 6 different family members, never paying anyone back while maintaining the fiction that he was a successful businessman who'd been betrayed by his ungrateful daughter. The family was fracturing in real time, with some people reaching out to me to apologize and hear my side of the story, while others doubled down on defending Warren because admitting he'd lied meant admitting they'd shunned me for no reason. Diane stayed with Francine for a week before getting her own apartment, and she filed separation papers that would eventually become divorce papers once the required waiting period passed. Brock and Cassidy separated officially, with Cassidy moving in with her sister and filing for divorce after 7 years of marriage that she described as financially and emotionally exhausting. I didn't feel victorious about any of the destruction, just tired and sad that it had taken this long for the truth to come out, and relieved that I no longer had to carry the weight of being the family scapegoat. On the Saturday after Thanksgiving, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment with the people who'd shown up for me when my biological family had abandoned me, and it was the best Thanksgiving meal I'd ever had despite happening 4 days late. Sloane brought wine, Kimberly brought homemade rolls, 3 friends from work brought side dishes, and Cassidy showed up with pumpkin pie and Dorothy as her +1. We sat around my small dining table that barely fit everyone, eating roasted chicken and mashed potatoes and green beans that cost a total of $86 split among 8 people, and it was perfect in a way Warren's expensive catered dinner never could have been. There was laughter and genuine conversation, no manipulation or hidden agendas, just people who cared about each other sharing a meal and being grateful for connection. Dorothy told stories about me as a child that I'd never heard, things I'd done that made her proud, but Shed never said out loud because Warren didn't like it when she praised me too much. Cassidy apologized again for enabling Brock and staying quiet when she knew I was being treated unfairly, and I told her that speaking up when it mattered was what counted, and it had taken real courage to expose the financial truth in front of Brock's investors. We toasted to chosen family and second chances, and I felt lighter than I had in 3 years, like something heavy had been lifted off my chest and I could finally breathe all the way. The recording from Thanksgiving Day sat on my laptop in multiple backup folders, evidence I hoped I'd never need to use, but that gave me peace of mind knowing it existed. Sloan told me I could still pursue legal action for the loan if I changed my mind, but I'd already decided the money wasn't worth the emotional cost of staying connected to Warren through a lawsuit. What I'd gained on Thanksgiving was worth more than $40,000. I'd gained my voice back. I'd gained proof that I wasn't crazy or dramatic or making things up, and I'd gained the knowledge that some people would believe me and stand with me even when it was hard. In the weeks that followed, I started rebuilding relationships with extended family members who'd been lied to about what happened 3 years ago. And some of those conversations were harder than others, because not everyone was ready to admit they'd been manipulated. Francine became a real friend instead of just an aunt, and we met for coffee every other week to talk about the family dynamics she'd witnessed growing up and how Warren had always been the golden child who could do no wrong in their parents' eyes. Dorothy invited me to lunch once a month, and slowly we rebuilt a relationship that Warren had nearly destroyed with his lies and manipulation. Diane reached out carefully through text messages, asking if I'd be willing to talk someday when I was ready, and I told her I forgave her but I needed space before we could have a real conversation about rebuilding trust. The lesson I learned from that Thanksgiving wasn't about revenge or vindication, although both of those felt good in the moment when Warren's scheme fell apart in front of his investors. The real lesson was about the difference between family you're born into and family you choose, and understanding that sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who hurt you most, while strangers and friends become the family that actually shows up when you need them. For 3 years, I'd questioned myself, wondering if maybe I was selfish for asking for my money back, maybe I was ungrateful for not appreciating everything Warren had done for me, maybe I deserved to be exiled from the family for being too focused on money. Thanksgiving Day proved that none of that was true, that I'd been manipulated and gaslit and scapegoated to cover up Warren's pattern of financial abuse that extended far beyond just me. I don't know if I'll ever have a real relationship with my parents again, and I'm learning to be okay with that uncertainty instead of trying to force a reconciliation that might not be healthy for anyone involved. Diane sends me text messages every few days, usually just small things like pictures of flowers or articles she thinks I'd find interesting, and I respond politely but without encouraging deeper conversation, because I'm not ready for that yet. Warren has respected the cease and desist letter so far, or maybe he just knows that reaching out would result in legal consequences, and he can't afford another scandal after losing his investor meeting and his wife in the same day. Brock blocked me on all social media, and I did the same to him, and I genuinely hope he figures out how to support himself financially instead of relying on his parents' borrowed money, but that's not my problem to solve anymore. The disgrace Warren called me on that Tuesday morning phone call turned out to be the best thing he could have called me, because it motivated me to show up with evidence and witnesses, instead of just accepting his manipulation one more time. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, even when family tells you it is, and that documentation is power when dealing with people who rewrite history to suit their narrative. I learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and you can forgive someone for being a flawed person while still choosing to protect yourself from their continued bad behavior. Most importantly, I learned that the family you choose, the people who show up for you when things are hard and believe you when you speak your truth, those are the relationships worth investing in and protecting. That Thanksgiving, my dad called me a family disgrace and demanded I pay for dinner for 17 people, but what he actually did was give me the opportunity to expose the truth and free myself from 3 years of carrying shame that was never mine to carry in the first place. The disgrace wasn't me, it never was, and now I have the receipts to prove it. Now I want to hear from you, because I know I'm not the only person who's dealt with toxic family dynamics and financial manipulation disguised as family obligation. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your family, the one who got blamed for problems you didn't create? Have you had a family member borrow money and then act like asking for repayment made you the villain? Drop your story in the comments, because I think we all need to know we're not alone in dealing with this kind of dysfunction, and sometimes reading someone else's experience helps you recognize the patterns in your own life. If this story resonated with you, Smash that like button and subscribe to this channel because I'll be sharing more stories about standing up to family manipulation and choosing yourself when family demands you sacrifice everything. Share this video with anyone you know who needs to hear that it's okay to set boundaries with toxic family members, even on holidays, even when everyone tells you family comes first. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that understands that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who claim to love you but treat you like you're disposable. I hope your Thanksgiving was filled with people who genuinely appreciate you, and if it wasn't, I hope you're building toward chosen family gatherings that feel like home in all the ways that matter.